we just don't talk about enough as a nation. And that is the war against working families that has been taking place for almost the last 50 years, where we have seen so many of our working people lose good-paying jobs because profitable corporations have shut down in this country and gone to cheap labor countries like Mexico or China or elsewhere, where we've seen large corporations making billions of dollars in profits, cutting back on the health care of their workers, sometimes cutting back on the wages of their workers. Also, they can give huge compensation packages to the CEOs of those companies, or do stock buybacks to enrich the stockholders and the CEOs. And I think what we are saying today is that at a time when in the last 30 years, the top 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, while the bottom half of Americans have seen a decline in their wealth. At a time when half of our people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, scared to death that somebody in the family may get sick or the car may break down, or there'll be a divorce in the family or something else which will put the family into financial disaster. What we are saying loudly is enough is enough. We need an economy that works for working people, not just the 1%. And we have got some pretty strong ideas, which I look forward to discussing with you about how we're going to make that transition and tell a handful of billionaires that they cannot continue their greed and corruption and their control of the economic and political life of this country. But before I go on, what we like to do at meetings like this is to talk about the impact of corporate decisions on the real lives of working people. And I can give all of the speeches in the world, but they don't mean as much as hearing what is going on in a community from people who are experiencing the pain that corporate America has left us. So I am very proud to introduce three people who are going to do a little bit of talking about what's going on in the community. And first, I want to introduce Chris Simmons. Chris is a third-year student at Iowa State University studying sociology. He was born and raised in Newton and comes from a family of union workers. Chris, thanks for being here.
Hey, y'all. It's good to see so many faces here. My name is Chris Simmons, and I'm a proud queer working-class Iowan student. I was born right here in Newton, Iowa, and for the majority of my town's existence, Newton was home of the Maytag factory, which always employed the majority of the workers in town. My dad and my grandpa both worked union jobs there with the UAW, and I probably would have done the same. Being in a union kept my dad and grandfather safe. It ensured that they had good wages and good benefits. UAW workers at Maytag, like my family, were proud of what they were creating in this town. But in 2006, when I was 8 years old, the bosses came out onto the factory floor and fired every single worker there. They realized that they could ship those jobs to Mexico and pay ununionized workers pennies compared to what they paid us. Those bosses left us for dead. Some of my earliest memories are watching my parents fight about money, watching my friends move away to bigger cities, and watching my dad sell his car for a little extra money. Newton wasn't the same. And I didn't understand why those things were happening. I was just a kid. All I knew is that I was scared. Maytag knew that they could increase their profits to help their bottom line with those layoffs, but took no thought to the effect it could have on the entire community. Whole communities should not be destroyed because of corporate greed. Throughout my entire lifetime, establishment Democrats have been visiting communities like Newton. They have taken tours of the factories just like Maytag's, and they promised us that they would do everything they could to get our jobs back and heal our towns. But not a damn thing has changed. The entire Democratic establishment left us for dead, just like those bosses. The only difference is one of them used us for profits, and one of them used us for votes. Instead of another establishment candidate who was picked for us by corporations, we need somebody who has a history of fighting for workers, like my family. We need somebody who will listen to the people on what we need and not be afraid to take on corporate power. Bernie has spent his entire career constantly fighting alongside workers for livable wages, for better working conditions, and unions for all. It's now our turn to work for him. We need a democratic socialist, we need a fighter for the people, and we need to elect Bernie Sanders. Thank you.
You know, let me thank Chris for his remarks. And he said something that I don't hear very often, and it struck me in my heart. Because I grew up in a working class family as well. My father had a steady job, just never made any money. But when Chris talked about what happens in a family when you're in financial difficulty, and the stress, the arguments that take place, those arguments that took place in my house as a kid, they seared me. All right? You had them at 8 years old, so did I. And that's true all over this country. And these folks with the big money who look at their bottom line and they say, hey, we can make more money paying somebody in Mexico $3 an hour. And I'll never forget, it was a long time ago, 15 years or so, I went to Mexico, went to the Maquiladora area. You know what that is? That's a zone where they welcome foreign corporations. And I remember the big, beautiful, modern corporations, the big buildings, they were beautiful, state-of-the-art factories. And then you went to visit, Judy and I were just talking about that, then you went to visit where the workers were living. Jane, you remember I went there? My wife, Jane? And I came back. They were literally living in cardboard shacks. You know, the cardboard stuff that the washing machines and the dishwashers come in, that's what they were living in. Drinking water out of a filthy stream, and somebody there strung up an electric light, some light bulb, making nothing. Working in a big, modern, efficient factory. And today we are going to tell corporate America, and as president, we are going to bring forth actions to stop this devastation and this greed. We take it for granted that companies can say on a given day, sorry, thousands of workers, you've lost your job because we can make more money going to Mexico or China. We're not going to allow that to happen anymore. They cannot continue to destroy families. Now it is my honor to introduce Judy Mulbrook, who is an employee who experienced fallout from Maytag's closing. She's currently the vice chair of UAW 997 Retirees Group, and we thank Judy so much for all that she's doing. Judy?
Thank you, Senator Sanders. I retired from Maytag's in 2003 after the company was acquired by Whirlpool. The plant was closed down in 2006. It was an incredibly difficult time for our community. When Whirlpool left Newton, they not only devastated the current workers, but they left the retired employees, but also the retired employees. We had a contract that stated that retirees would be given health care protection. But after Whirlpool took UAW to court, we lost our health care. The overturn has affected every single UAW or union retiree from Maytag. When they negotiated the contract with Whirlpool, that part of the contract was never opened up, and it should have remained in place, but it wasn't even a discussion. The Iowa court judge threw it out and threw us out in the cold in the process. Bernie's plan for health care will help every UAW retiree and everyone in this community regain what was taken from them. Single-payer Medicare for all is a solution that we need. Ensure that companies cannot continue to swindle hardworking people out of their benefits and a healthy life. Even now, after the plant has been closed 12 years, Newton is still recovering. We have less great union jobs. In place are non-union shops that do not have the safety nets we had at Maytags. I am now employed at the Newton Schools District. We have lost school funding for both federal and state because of the decline in enrollment. We also have lost scholarships that the Maytag company gave to students that enabled them to go to college. With the reduction of the union force, we have large corporations making profit hand over fist at the expense of human life for the sake of the almighty dollar. This corporation and greed has to stop. The answer is fairly simple. We have to elect a president who isn't afraid to stand up to big corporations, but will fight every day for the will of the people. There is no other candidate who has a longer track record of standing in solidarity with unions and working people. Because of that and so many other reasons, I stand with Senator Bernie Sanders and support him as the next President of the United States. It is about all of us, not just about him.
Thank you very much, Judy. Let me just make a few comments on some of the things that Judy said. Number one, I have believed for my entire adult life that health care is a human right, not a privilege. And as president, as Judy indicated, I will end the absurdity, the vulgarity of the United States being the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a human right. And because you're going to hear a lot of lies and distortions from the healthcare industry, drug companies and insurance companies that made $100 billion in profit last year. It is unconscionable. What Medicare for All means is, A, we're going to expand existing Medicare to cover dental care, hearing aids, eyeglasses, and home health care. Number two, we're going to do what Canada and other countries do. We are eliminating all premiums. No more premiums, which is nothing more than a tax for the insurance companies. No more co-payments. No more co-payments, so you got to worry, gee, if I go to the doctor for a checkup, it may cost me $50 and I don't have that $50 as a co-payment. That's gone. No more deductibles, the insanity. Oh, I have health insurance. But I got a $5,000 or $10,000 deductible, so I can't go to the doctor no matter what my policy says, because I don't have the out-of-pocket money to pay for that. And that is what we do. And All that we're doing is saying that we got a program called Medicare now, which is a good program. We expand it. And then in the first year, we take the eligibility age from 65, where it is right now, down to 55. Not all that complicated, not all that disruptive. In fact, it is the easiest path forward. Second year, we go down to 45. Third year, we go down to 35. And then we cover every man, woman, and child in this country. And by the way, when you eliminate all premiums and co-payments and out-of-pocket expenses, and when, as part of Medicare for all, we take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and lower drug prices so that nobody in America pays more than $200 a year for the prescription drugs they need. When you do all of that, the overwhelming majority of the American people, except the very, very wealthy, will be paying less for better health care. That's what we have got to do. It is now my pleasure to introduce Eric Lemons. Eric works in a very important and growing industry here in Iowa and across this country, and that is the wind turbine industry. In my view, Donald Trump is dangerously, dangerously wrong when he suggests that climate change is a hoax. Man, climate change is not a hoax. Climate change is a very dangerous reality for our country and for countries all over the world. And we have introduced a Green New Deals program which will transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And I want to thank the people of Iowa who have been leaders in terms of wind energy. You get about 35% of your electricity from wind, which is a significant step forward for this state and for the country. Under our proposal, billions of dollars, tens and tens of billions of dollars, will come into sustainable energy. It will create good-paying jobs in Iowa, Vermont, and all over this country. And as Americans, we will be proud to say that instead of ignoring the reality of climate change, we are going to lead the world in transforming the global energy system into energy efficiency and sustainable energy and save this planet for the children of the future. Eric, thank you for what you're doing. Come on up.
Thank you all for inviting me to speak today. My name is Eric Lemons. I am 21 years old and went straight into the workforce after I graduated high school. When I left high school, I knew I could not afford college, and I feared that I would end up in a dead-end job with no hope. But the renewable energy sector gave me an amazing opportunity. At 19 years old, with no college education, I got a job at TPI Composites here in Newton producing wind blades. From day one, I knew I was a part of something special and had an opportunity for a career that really mattered. I had a steady job, health insurance, and a 401k, which is more than I can say for most people my age. After a year and a half with TPI, I am now working for one of the biggest power companies in the world, GE. I feel grateful to be on the forefront of a new career field, traveling the country and repairing wind blades across this beautiful nation. In the wake of the Maytag closure, Newton had really been struggling. TPI and the renewable energy industry revived this town and brought in a new wave of opportunity. Newton is now the leading edge of renewable energy production, shaping a better world for our community. We need a Green New Deal to make room for thousands more people just like me to have promising careers and an opportunity to get a leg up in this world. We need a candidate who doesn't just support it, but wrote the damn bill, and we need it now. And there's more to it than just job creation. By rewarding companies that utilize renewable energy, together, we will create a better, healthier world, one step at a time. But we cannot do this with corrupt money polluting our government. And that is where Bernie Sanders comes in. He has not taken a penny from super PACs during his entire campaign. He has not bowed to the interest of pro-big oil lobbyists and CEOs in his entire career. He has and always will fight for everyone. And that's why Bernie Sanders is the clear choice in the 2020 presidential election. And now it is my honor to introduce the next president of the United States, Bernie Sanders.
Well, let me thank Chris, Judy, and Eric for their wonderful, wonderful remarks. And I think they've essentially said everything that I was going to say. Thank you, guys. But here is, I think, what the issue is. You know, what our campaign is about is thinking big, not small. It is thinking outside of the box. It's kind of breaking down those barriers and making us ask simple questions like, why? Why do we live in a country where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society? Why is that? Why do we live in a society where the top 1% earns 49% of all new income? Why do we live in a world, in a democracy, where billionaires today, as Eric was saying, are able to contribute hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process in order to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful? Why is this great nation the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right, while we're spending twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other country? Why is our life expectancy actually going down? You all know that? In America today, all over the world, people are living longer lives than they should. Medical breakthroughs, improved health care. And yet in this country, life expectancy is actually going down. And you know why it's going down? What the doctors call it is diseases of despair. Do you know what that means? It means that all over this country, people have given up hope about a decent future for themselves and their kids. And they're turning to opioids, and they're turning to alcohol, and in some cases, they're turning to suicide. That's what's going on in America. And what this campaign is about is not saying we can solve all of the problems facing everybody. Life is complicated. But at least we can guarantee the American people certain basic benefits that they are entitled to as human beings. All right? We are... You know, Judy touched on this, but just stop and think. What will it mean to the people of this country when you know you can go to the doctor anytime you want? If, God forbid, your child gets sick and ends up in the hospital, you don't have to worry about that medical bill at a time when 500,000 people in America go bankrupt because of medical bills. Think about the cruelty, the insanity of somebody being diagnosed with cancer or some other serious illness, and then not only having to worry about getting well, which is hard enough, but worrying about whether their family is going to suffer financial ruin. Can you believe that? That's what's going on right now. It is about what our campaign is about, and Eric was talking about this, and others were talking about this, is understanding that workers in this country have the right to be part of the trade union movement in America. And we have legislation in which will double the number of people in unions in my first 4 years in the White House. And Eric talked about education. He said he's a young man growing up from a working class family, couldn't afford to go to college. Well, you know what I think? I think, and I congratulate Eric for doing the great work he's doing in that a very important industry. But I think every person in this country, as a human right, should be able to get a higher education, whether it's college or a trade school, regardless of the income of his or her family. believe, interestingly enough, I don't know if some of you saw it in the paper today, a guy who worked for Trump in the Department of Education who was administering the student loan program. His name is Wayne Johnson, a Trump guy. He actually resigned and he said, you know what, we got to cancel student debt in America. He's absolutely right. You know, if we could bail out the crooks on Wall Street with trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans from the Federal Reserve, if we can give over $1 trillion in tax breaks to large corporations and the 1% under Trump, if we could provide hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks to the fossil fuel industry, we can cancel all student debt in this country. So what we are fighting for is not only the demand that the wealthiest corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. We're doing something else. We are saying that if you work at a large corporation, you should have some say in what goes on in that corporation because you're a human being who are impacted by the decisions of those corporations. And that is why we are proposing something not dissimilar from what goes on in Germany right now, where workers sit on the board of directors. All right? So when you go to work, you're not just a cog in the machine working for a paycheck. You're saying, hey, I got some ideas about how we can improve the company. And when you have 45% of the members of the board who are working people, you know what? Companies like Maytag are not going to shut down and move to Mexico because workers will not allow that to happen. So our job and what we intend to do is create a government whose priorities are not the priorities of wealthy campaign contributors. When you have a company like Amazon making over $11 billion last year, owned by the wealthiest guy in this country, Bezos is worth about $150 billion. That company, Amazon, did not pay one nickel in federal income tax. That is called a corrupt political system. That's what money does. It buys tax breaks for the rich, and it allows corporations to shut down in America and move abroad. So, brothers and sisters, it is time for us to create a government that works for us, not just for them. I don't have a super PAC. I don't want a super PAC. I don't need a super PAC. Because our campaign is funded, if you can believe this, to the tune of $16 a contribution from over 1 million people in this country. More people have contributed to our campaign at this moment than any campaign in the history of the United States of America. So, all right, let me open it up now for any questions. I see a gentleman, yellow hat.
Thank you, Senator. Oh, thank you so much. Welcome, Senator. Welcome to Newton.
Thank you.
I actually live in the Des Moines area, but I'm very familiar with this town. I used to be a clerk for one of the representatives from Newton up at the State House. And I'm really interested, I love the Green New Deal. I love it. And so I want you to dig in, especially about how the Green New Deal is going to work in towns like Newton and in towns like Pella and in towns like Oskaloosa, and not just the big cities, but even towns small.
Absolutely. For a start, when we talk about the Green New Deal, the first point that has to be made is that we have no choice as moral human beings but to address the planetary crisis of climate change. It's not a choice. I have 4 kids and 7 grandchildren. We all have families. We all worry about future generations. And if we do not aggressively address the crisis of climate change, The world that we will be leaving to those beautiful young kids will be a world that is increasingly uninhabitable and unhealthy here in America and all over the world. I don't have to tell you, you all see it with your eyes. We are seeing the devastation done recently in the Bahamas. We remember Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina. We are seeing rising sea levels, which will threaten communities, coastal communities all over America, all over the world. We're seeing drought right now, unbelievably. Seems to never end. In California, there's another wildfire. Do you all remember Paradise, California, the town? I visited there a few months ago where we announced our climate change plan. Town of 26,000 people, 86 people died. Something like 18,000 structures were destroyed, and $16 billion in damage was occurred in one small town. Texas, unprecedented rain, flooding communities. Australia, Europe, unprecedented levels of heat and heat waves. So we got a planetary crisis. And I have been criticized for coming up with an expensive proposal. In fact, it is. It's $16 trillion over a 10-year period, and we pay for it. But it's expensive. I'm not going to deny that to you. But please tell me what the alternative is to saving the planet. Anybody here got a better idea than making sure that our children and grandchildren and future generations have a healthy planet in which to live? Nobody has a better idea. This is a moral necessity. So what we have done is nothing more than listen to the scientists. And they have told us that we have got to act extremely boldly, not only in this country, but lead the entire world away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. So, some of the jobs that will be created is in exactly the work that Eric is doing right now. We're going to see an explosion in wind, an explosion in solar energy, in geothermal. We're going to invest very heavily in research and development. And I'll tell you where else we're going to create significant numbers of jobs. We're going to create jobs by retrofitting older buildings. In Iowa and in Vermont, we got a lot of older buildings that waste an enormous amount of energy. Let's make them energy efficient. Let's provide the insulation, the roofing, the windows. Let's produce those products here in the United States. Let's have a transportation system not dependent on fossil fuel, but on electricity and other sustainable energies. Let us lead the world and produce products that go out all over the world, manufacture them here, because we can't do this alone. This is not an American issue. I wish I could tell you that we could do it alone. We can't. Russia and China and all the countries of the world have got to be involved in this process. And maybe, just maybe, instead of spending $1.5 trillion every single year on weapons of destruction all over this world designed to kill each other, maybe we come together and we use those resources to combat our common enemy. Okay, I think there was a young lady here somewhere had a question for me. You're not a young lady. Let me get to, where is she? Are you the young lady? All right.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard announced earlier today that she is not running for re-election in Congress in 2020. Are you concerned that she is going to run as a third-party candidate? And if so, what is your message to her?
Well, I've known Tulsi for a number of years, and Tulsi is a friend. I don't know, honestly don't know. I have not talked to her. I just heard the same thing as you did. All that I can say is that I believe that Donald Trump is the most dangerous president in the history of this country. I believe, and I say this knowing full well, that Trump did well in Iowa. He won Iowa. But I hope that the people of Iowa, those who voted for Trump, understand that we cannot continue having a president who is a pathological liar, somebody who does not understand or respect the Constitution of the United States, somebody who believes that maybe when you grow up as a billionaire or a very wealthy person, you have that arrogance that you think that the law does not apply to you. Well, I got news for Mr. Trump. The law applies to the President of the United States as well as everybody else in this country. You're not above the law. So I say all of that to say that I believe that all of the candidates now, the Democratic candidates, and many of them are friends of mine, some of them I've known for decades, understand that after this primary process is over and the people, the Democrats of America, select a candidate, and needless to say, I am here to ask you to make sure that that is me. But that after we select a candidate, all of us will come together, understanding that our most important thing that we can do right now is to defeat Trump. So I think that is what my hope and expectation is. Okay. Okay. Other questions? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here, sir.
My pleasure.
My name is Betsy Duffy, and my husband and I have an 11-year-old daughter named Lily. She really wanted to be here today, but they have school in Pella. But she actually asked another candidate this, and she asked that I ask you. For the school this year, she asked for a bulletproof backpack. And that, as a parent, was a really hard conversation to have. You assume that your children don't see what's going on and hear what's going on. And when we had the conversation, she said, Mommy, I don't want to be shot in school. And just yesterday, they had a lockdown drill, which I'm grateful that they do, but really disheartened that they have to think about. So she would like to know what you would do to curb gun violence.
Thank you. Betsy is your name?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Betsy, for the question. You know, and I thank you very much for speaking for your daughter, because I think we don't appreciate, we all talk about the horrors of the gun violence and the massacres that we see, and we don't fully appreciate what Betsy said is that the kids know what's going on. And the trauma. There was a time when many of us were kids. Kids went to school. It was, you liked school, you didn't like school, you socialized, you learned, but it was a safe place. No one ever doubted that for 1 second. And the idea that kids are now scared about going to school, parents are scared about sending their kids to school, is maybe the worst part of this entire epidemic, because it traumatizes. My grandchildren also in New Hampshire and Vermont undergo these same drills. This is what I think we've got to do for a start, and most importantly, we need to listen to the American people on this issue. Now, I come from a very rural state, Vermont, like Iowa. A lot of people hunt, a lot of people own guns. But all over this country, whether you're a gun owner or not a gun owner, whether you're from Iowa, rural Iowa, or you're from Detroit, Michigan, people understand that we need gun safety legislation not dictated by the NRA. So the first thing we have got to do, we've got to do what the American people want us to do, not what a right-wing extremist group wants us to do. So the first thing I promise you is I will not be intimidated by the NRA. I think for a number of years now I've had F ratings or D- ratings from the NRA, and I promise you, it's an unusual promise, if elected president, I will have an F rating from the NRA. That's an unusual campaign promise, I suppose, but it's sure. But what does it mean? Look, just briefly, what does it mean? The American people understand that if somebody has a history of violence, that person should not own a weapon, all right? So we have to expand background checks. It's like 90% of the American people understand that. The American people understand that we cannot continue the gun show loophole, which allows gun owners to avoid a background check by buying their weapons at a gun show. We have to end the so-called straw man provision, which allows somebody legally to walk into a gun shop legally, do a background check, buy a dozen weapons, and then sell them to gang members. Got to end that. We have got to, in my view, and I've held this view for many decades when it wasn't popular, We got to ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. Assault weapons are designed to kill people as quickly as possible. We have seen some of that in Las Vegas and elsewhere. We have got to hold gun manufacturers liable when they are intentionally selling guns into communities where they know that those guns are going into criminal elements, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot more that we have to do. But this is a crisis, not only when we are losing 40,000 people a year to guns, but to what it is doing to the children in this country. That is not a legacy we should leave our kids. I want our kids to go to school, to be happy, to feel safe, to enjoy their days, not to be scared that some terrible thing is going to happen. Thanks for that question. Okay. Okay, Steve, did you have a question?
Thanks, Senator. Yes, Senator. I would like to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier, and that is the party coming together after this primary process. You've specifically criticized Joe Biden throughout your campaign. Just yesterday, you brought up his support for the bankruptcy bill. In some ways, he really represents what you're running against here. So are you saying if Joe Biden were the nominee, you would put your heart and soul into supporting him?
Well, let me just say two things. You know, a campaign is a campaign of ideas. I've known Joe for many years. You know what? Joe's a friend of mine. And Joe and I worked together when he was Vice President of the United States. Joe Biden and I disagree on issues. And I don't think it is bad that we explain to the people of Iowa and America where our differences are. Joe disagrees with me on health care. You have heard Joe criticize me once or twice or 20 times because of my support for Medicare for all. All right? It's called democracy. I disagree with Joe. All right? I do not think a super PAC is healthy for American democracy. All right? And I think, actually, if you check the record, Joe has said something similar. You know, when billionaires and wealthy people contribute, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They want something. And that is one of the great problems in American society. So to answer your question, I would hope and expect that in this campaign, the people of Iowa, New Hampshire, and America deserve a real clash of ideas. All right? What do I believe? What does Joe believe? What do the other candidates believe? And you guys are going to make up your decision. It's called democracy. All right? And I know in Iowa you take that very seriously. So of course I'll be critical of Joe when I disagree with him. I disagree with Joe. He supported the war in Iraq. I opposed the war in Iraq. Joe supported these terrible trade agreements, NAFTA, and normalized trade relations with China. I disagreed with him, strongly opposed those agreements. Joe supported the bankruptcy bill. I thought that was a terrible bill. Joe disagrees with me on health care. Let the American people decide who was right on the issues. But to answer your question, of course it goes without saying that I will support the Democratic nominee. I hope it's me. But if it's not me, look, everybody up in that stage in the recent debate, they understand that on our worst day, nobody up on that stage could not do 100 times better than Trump on his best day. Yeah, Brian?
Senator, you said clash of ideas, so...
I'm sorry?
You talked about the clash of ideas, so I'd like to ask you about the clash of ideas with Medicare for All and how that relates to Senator Warren. She signaled that she is going to indicate in the near future how she plans to pay for Medicare for All, which would suggest that she has a plan to pay for it differently than you've already outlined, even though she's a co-sponsor of that bill. What would concern you about the way that she would pay for Medicare for All different from the way that you've already outlined, and how could that be different for the voters that have to assess that?
Obviously, I haven't seen her plan because it has not yet been made public. I don't know that she has the plan yet. But all I can tell you is the following, all right? To me, when we, a lot of people, as you know, Ryan, talk about Medicare for All. It's a big term. And I want everybody here to know what I mean by that. And it's building on what the Canadians do, and they live, tell you what they do. What the Canadians do is you go to any doctor you want, you don't take out your wallet, you don't take out your credit card, okay? Very simple. It is not a complex. One of the problems is not only that our system is so expensive, it is enormously complicated. True? How many forms have we all filled out? All right? Trying to argue with the insurance. That's gone. All right? You go into any doctor you want. When you leave a hospital, there is no bill. There is, again, no premiums. They're gone. No copayments. No out-of-pocket expenses. It is paid for out of the general tax base. What our proposal does, what we have done, is provided a number of options out there, which very clearly will create a situation where the overwhelming majority of the American people, except for the very, very wealthy, will pay less for health care than they are paying today. And that's what Medicare for All means to me. Complete freedom of choice, people not taking out their wallets, paid for out of the general tax base in a progressive way. That's what I am doing. We will see what Senator Warren does. Yeah.
Senator, you've talked pretty openly the last couple days about your age and about your experience. You said there are advantages to being old. Do you feel more compelled to speak more openly about your age and your health after having a heart attack?
What I said, Sean, and I think it's a valid point, is that the voters of Iowa, voters of America, will look at the totality of a candidate. Who is that person? Who is that man? Who is that woman? What do I think about that person? Is age a factor? Yeah, it is. Is experience a factor? Yeah, I think it is. The most important factor, and sometimes media ignores that, is what does the candidate stand for? You know, there are candidates running around this country who are young, who are vigorous, who are nice people, good husbands, good wives, good parents. They want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and give tax breaks to billionaires. No way. All right? And, you know, sometimes we forget it's not a personality contest. I'm not here. This is not a beauty contest, which obviously I would win. I know that. But what this is, it really is. I think Judy said it. It's not about me. It's about you. And it's about you and you and you. You have got to make the hard decision. What are the ideas? What are the programs? What are the laws that make sense for your lives? Trump and his friends introduced a budget. Trump introduced a budget after lying to the people of Iowa. Remember, he said he's not going to cut Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. His budget does exactly that. All right? Do you want a candidate who does not believe that climate change is real? Okay. So the answer is you look at the totality of a candidate. And the advantage, Sean, of being older is that I have a long record. The ideas that I am fighting for now didn't come to me yesterday. You know, I didn't look at a poll which said, hey, you know what, 71% of Democrats support Medicare for all. Bernie, you should support Medicare for all. I supported Medicare for all 30 years ago. Nobody told me that it was a good idea to stand with the working class of this country. I've been on more picket lines, I expect, than all my opponents combined over the last 30 years. That's what I do. So I answer your question, Sean, in this sense. Having a long record gives people the understanding that these ideas that I'm talking about, they are in my guts. They are in my heart. This is who I am as a human being, and it ain't going to change. I'm not going to meet with some wealthy donors who tell me that these ideas are not good. My constituency is the working class of this country. I come from the working class of this country, and as President of the United States, I will fight for the working class of this country. Thank you all very much.
Senator